The most dangerous mafia in the world is not the one you see in movies, and it's not the one making headlines every week. It's the one that operates quietly, without attention, without faces, and without ever needing to prove its power in public. While other criminal organizations rely on violence to show control, this one built something much more effective: a system. A network that moves money across continents, controls operations behind legitimate businesses, and influences entire industries without ever being visible. They don't give interviews, they don't appear online, and they don't leave obvious traces. Most people go through their entire lives without even realizing this network exists. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. Because the moment you don't see something, you stop looking for it. And when you stop looking for it, it can grow without limits. This is not just a mafia. This is a system that has survived political collapse, economic chaos, and decades of global investigations. And despite all of that, it is still operating today. This is the Russian Mafia. The origins of the Russian Mafia are very different from what most people expect. It did not begin as a group of street gangs trying to control neighborhoods or territories. Instead, it developed inside one of the most controlled and restrictive systems in modern history: the Soviet Union. During that time, the government controlled nearly every aspect of life, and crime was heavily punished. But even in such a system, a parallel world began to grow. Inside Soviet prisons, a unique criminal culture emerged. Prison was not just a place of punishment. It became a place where identities were formed, alliances were created, and a strict hierarchy was established. The people who rose to the top of this hierarchy were known as Vory Zakone, which translates to thieves in law. This title was not something you could claim for yourself. It had to be given by others who were already part of the system. And once you received it, your entire life changed. You were no longer just a criminal. You became part of an organized structure with rules that were absolute and could not be broken. These rules were simple but strict. Never cooperate with authorities. Never work for the state. Always support other members of the system, and most importantly, always maintain loyalty to the code. Breaking any of these rules could result in punishment, and in many cases, that punishment was death. Over time, this prison-based system became more organized and more powerful. It created a network of individuals who trusted each other, who followed the same code, and who were willing to do whatever it took to maintain their position within the hierarchy. One of the most unique aspects of this system was how identity and status were represented. Unlike traditional organizations that used titles or ranks, the Russian Mafia developed a visual language. Tattoos became one of the most important elements of this culture, but these were not random or decorative. Every tattoo had meaning, and every symbol represented something specific about the person wearing it. For example, stars placed on the shoulders or chest often indicated authority and high status within the hierarchy. Images of churches or domes could represent the number of times someone had been imprisoned. Other symbols showed loyalty, experience, or specific roles within the system. This created a structure where you could understand who someone was with them ever saying a word. It also made it almost impossible to fake your identity. If someone tried to wear symbols they had not earned, the consequences were immediate and severe. Respect within this system was not given freely. It had to be earned through actions, through loyalty, and often through violence. And once someone achieved a high level of respect, they gained influence over others. This influence was not just about fear, it was about control, discipline, and maintaining order within the network. This system allowed the Russian Mafia to function even without centralized leadership. It was not dependent on a single person. Instead, it operated through shared rules and mutual understanding, which made it incredibly resilient. Everything changed in the early 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. What had once been a tightly controlled system suddenly became unstable. Laws were unclear, enforcement was weak, and the economy began to fall apart. Businesses were left without protection, and entire industries became vulnerable. For the Russian Mafia, this was not a crisis, it was an opportunity. Because they already had structure, connections, and experience operating outside the law, they were able to move quickly. While governments struggled to adapt, these networks expanded. They took control of factories, gained influence over banks, and became deeply involved in industries like oil, gas, and natural resources. Many business owners had no choice but to cooperate. Without protection from the state, they turned to these groups for security. But that security came at a cost. Over time, the line between legitimate business and organized crime became blurred. This period allowed the Russian Mafia to transition from a prison-based network into a powerful economic force. They were no longer just criminals. They became businessmen, investors, and decision-makers. And once they entered the world of business, their influence grew even further. As their operations expanded, the Russian Mafia began to move beyond national borders. Europe became one of the key regions for their activities. Ports, financial centers, and major cities provided the perfect environment for expansion. From there, their influence spread even further, reaching into Asia, the Middle East, and North America. One of the main reasons for this success was their ability to adapt. They did not rely on a single type of crime. Instead, they diversified. Drug trafficking, arms dealing, cybercrime, and financial fraud all became part of their operations. But what truly set them apart was how they handled money. Instead of relying on physical cash, they developed complex systems for moving and hiding funds. Money was transferred through multiple layers of transactions, often passing through different countries and businesses before reaching its final destination. This made it extremely difficult for law enforcement to track. Even when authorities identified part of the network, the rest remained hidden. It was like trying to trace a single drop of water in an ocean. At the same time, they invested in legitimate businesses. Restaurants, real estate, financial services, and other industries became part of their operations. These businesses served two purposes. They generated profit, and they provided a way to hide illegal activities within legal structures. Today, the Russian Mafia is not a single organization. It is a network of networks, connected through relationships, shared interests, and a common understanding of how the system works. There is no single leader controlling everything, and that is one of the main reasons it has survived for so long. Because there is no central point, it is very difficult to dismantle. Removing one part of the network does not destroy the entire system. It simply adapts and continues. Another reason is their ability to remain invisible. Unlike other groups that attract attention through violence or public displays of power, the Russian Mafia often avoids unnecessary exposure. They operate quietly, using influence rather than force whenever possible. They also understand how to integrate into existing systems. By working within business and financial structures, they become part of the environment. This makes it harder to identify them as a separate entity. Law enforcement agencies around the world have spent years trying to combat these networks. There have been arrests, investigations, and international operations. But despite all of this, the system continues to exist. Because it is not just about individuals, it is about structure, adaptability, and the ability to operate without being seen. The Russian Mafia is not defined by violence alone, and it is not limited to one country or one group of people. It is a system that has evolved over time, adapting to changes and surviving challenges that would have destroyed other organizations. And in a world where most power is visible, tracked, and constantly monitored, this system remains one of the few that operates in silence. And that silence is exactly what makes it so dangerous.